Welcome to Workforce Central, the official podcast of the National Association of Workforce Boards. Stay tuned as we explore the latest resources, thoughts, and trends in workforce development. And now, here's your host, Ron Painter.
Welcome to Workforce Central, the official podcast of the National Association of Workforce Boards from Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Ron Painter. I am delighted that you're joining us for the second part of my conversation with Barbara Dyer, who is president and CEO of the Hitachi Foundation and senior lecturer at the Sloan School of Management. Barbara, you mentioned that as you looked at these 100 companies and you talked about the recognition of long term, nothing really seems long term anymore. These organizations have to be operating in a really bumpy, I guess, for lack of a better term, a bumpy environment. What impact does this? And I know the economists argue on both sides. Disruption is great, innovation is wonderful, and others arguing. What are you seeing as the downside of all of this instability in the market? Because then I want to ask you about your former side of the of the equation. I guess we want to talk about the public, but
let's talk about. So what I described a moment ago are companies that really have made a long-term commitment, but their business model is often a product of the disruption that's happening all around us and the requirement that they continuously innovate in order to stay alive. So innovation is an overused word. But just to give you an example, there's a manufacturer just in Baltimore that started producing bagel baskets just at Marlin Steel Wire Corporation, and it was a commodity. And bagel baskets became less popular, he claims, because of the Atkins diet, and he had to change his business model altogether. And so he became a customized manufacturer of products that companies like Boeing and others need, and it had to be he had to completely change the way he operated in order to. We use the term on demand. He had to be able to come up with the basket that the customer needed for a particular, very sort of highly tailored product, and had to do it within days, not within weeks or months. So he had to completely change his operation in order to respond to that customer with tailored requirements so that every basket is different, every design is customized, and so the designers and the fabricators had to work really closely together. They had to work very closely with the customer. They had to make sure they understood. So that's innovation in that context. And it was the realization that he was operating in a different environment and that he had to create an operation that could continuously change and innovate that led to his investments in his workers. So in this instance, he took a company that was failing and where the workers were miserable and that was clearly on its way out. And because of disruption and innovation, he developed an approach that, at least for the foreseeable future, is really fit for the environment that we're in. It's highly automated, it's highly tailored, it's highly customated, it's continuously innovating and changing. Technology has accelerated the pace of other changes that were already underway from the sort of 1980s to the present, which is that the whole organization of the firm has really changed. And so when you started and you were thinking of large publicly traded corporations, our mental map of business in America was kind of forged in the middle of the last century with large corporations that provided continuous employment, that continued to train people, provided
That at the end we get the pension and the gold watch.
Right, the pension and the gold watch, and you're set. So that doesn't exist anymore. That's really broken apart, and technological platforms have enabled that to kind of progress at a faster speed. It's also enabled all sorts of new businesses to form. And in the process, the sort of set of social benefits and the safety net has begun to unravel, because the system that we had for assurances that provided a sense of security and stability for each of us, that system was dependent on the firm being the mediator or the purveyor of those benefits. And it was that worker-firm relationship that our whole system of benefits and our whole structure of labor law and is built around. So now we're in a different environment, and it's fascinating. It's a fascinating time. And it is inevitably creating all sorts of dislocations and problems for people in that system, and also real opportunities for people. So,
if you think lots of asking you to look back on your prior experience on the public side, lots of what we have today in terms of education policy, in terms of workforce development policy, whether you look at the 1930s or you look at Lyndon Johnson in the 60s, that was sort of the framework that government somehow was a supplement to what business was doing. The economy that you're describing, the changes that we all understand are happening, have changed that business side. What do you see as the role, or how do you see government policy needs to change? And I guess, how do I need to see this market as the individual?
Yeah, I don't know how big a picture we should draw here. I mean, in a sense, I think that we have a nation that began with a vision and a set of values that are in the preamble to the Constitution that basically assume that an optimistic and hopeful public that believes that they have the opportunity to work and to support themselves and then to be effective participants in this democracy. And so you have to sort of start with a belief that people who should be able to work and be able to provide for themselves through work. And you have work as so personal and so important to each of us. We started by talking about my career. And, when I was a little kid, people would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I had a million different things. And now, the first question you ask is, tell me about what you've done.
You do.
And that's so important to each and every one of us. So I believe that we need to have a society that enables people to work and creates maximum flexibility and maximum possibilities, and is built on a sense of optimism and the can-do spirit that really is who we are. And I think that is, at the moment, in jeopardy. The way all of this works is different. So how do you think about what our goals are? That our goals are to have a continuous ability to innovate. That is a trademark of who we are. We love to create. We love to make new things. We love to solve problems. So we want to have a structure. Government creates the framework. It creates the rules of the game. So you want to have a structure that enables all of this disruption, that embraces this disruption, but does it in a way that also enables individuals in this society to feel secure, to feel like they have possibilities, that they are not going to go under, that they have a safety net. So what does that look like in a 21st century frame? It looks like a lot more on-ramps and off-ramps, a lot more portability, a lot more on-demand learning and skill development. It looks like data gathering about the practice of firms in different ways of classifying what who the employer is and what kind of employment people have. I mean, all of this is now in question. But that's what we have to be focusing on, is how do you create the rules of the game, that sort of fabric around all of this that enables continuous innovation and creates a really important level of security and assurances so people can be hopeful and optimistic and get where they need to be without a huge amount of roadblocks put in their way.
In some ways, it is the exciting part of, I guess, the American experience, right? Every generation has to redefine what the words for the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution says. We all have to define what we mean by that inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Do you see this? I mean, all of us are consumers in one way or another, and so we're all used to going into the store and having lots of options, or going online now and having lots of options. Do you see that kind of consumer demand? That's part of the challenge for workforce boards. That's part of the challenge for government policy around how do we do education? How do we do skilling in America?
Yeah. I think we have a culture now that basically expects on demand, everything on demand, and on demand is possible in all sorts of ways. Workforce boards are kind of caught between the 20th and the 21st century, and are challenged to modernize, and because workforce boards are in the world of government, in a sense, government is by its nature very slow to change and not usually leading, usually lagging the change. So that's, I think, the challenge for workforce boards, is to figure out what you're a network across this country. It's a great infrastructure upon which to build a 21st century system. But I think the challenge is that if you don't, somebody else will. And a lot of it is happening already in the world of startups and all of the, so job searches, job matching, career skill development, all of that is happening in real time, on demand, in so many different ways. Some of it is good, some of it isn't. New forms of credentials are emerging that are not, some of them are legitimate, some of them aren't, so it's absolutely crazy out there. And so where do workforce boards, how do you get a hold of this and figure out how this incredible infrastructure with real credibility can shape that future in a way that's going to have maximum benefit for the largest number of people?
It is the challenge.
Yeah.
It is the challenge.
I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I mean, it's just.
What do you see?
Do I have the answer? No, I don't. But I think that's your task.
But what are some of the markers? I mean, data, the explosion in our access to data. Are there elements in data that, as you have observed business over these last years as with Hitachi, are there markers that you think workforce boards could look at? Where is data? Where's the data that we need? Is there some data not out there yet?
I think the data are there. It's the challenge that we all have, because there's so much of it, is kind of harvesting that data in ways that are meaningful to us and in ways that give us what we need to know. And I think the first step is asking ourselves, well, what is that we actually really need to know? What we tend to do, just thinking about, this sort of basic planning for careers, is that we tend to look at and have somewhat useful data on jobs that have been filled, but we don't really do very well at looking out ahead. And so if you have a linear train and place model, then you're training for the jobs of today and yesterday, and placing not always in the best possible placements, and not necessarily training for something that's down the road. So how do you think about all of that the problem is that train and place model, which is a linear model, doesn't work anymore, because we all know, we've used this a lot, is that it's a lifelong pursuit, and that you have to have, people call them on-ramps and off-ramps. Maybe it's, simultaneous ramps, because you have to continuously build your skills and have the navigational skills to move through a career of many, many jobs and continuous skill development. So it's it's the navigational tools that are really important, and I'm not sure we're providing those navigational tools for particularly for people who are on the margins of the economy. I don't know that we're recognizing that they too are technologically enabled or would like to be technologically enabled, so we place them in a older form of training, and rather than really creating access to the online platforms that are being used by a lot of others, by a lot of millennials in particular. So there's the trying to figure out what data do we need in order to be effective as, in your case, as a workforce board. What do we need to know about the changes, the direction in this economy that is the region that I'm working in? What do I need to know about helping the people that I'm most concerned about build those navigational tools so that they can move through their careers with a level of fluidity that will enable them to be successful, and that at each sort of transition point, they have on demand at their fingertips a means by which they will gain the skills and be able to do the search and be matched to jobs that are really going to be important to them. So there's that part of it, which is, that's a big challenge right there. The other role for government is to also try to find ways to ensure that individual workers are not dramatically disadvantaged by the technology. So a great example is what's happening, for example, in very low skilled jobs, hotel workers, retail workers, where the scheduling algorithms, for example, are working to the benefit of the firm by maximizing efficiency, but creating havoc on the lives of these individuals. So how do you use those same scheduling algorithms to create a rational life for the individual and still enable the firm to be efficient? So does government play a role in all that? I don't know, but it should be a priority for us that we use those technologies in ways that also enable people to have some predictability in their lives, be able to be responsive to their children, be able to have their doctor's appointments, and not be. So these are on-demand workers in setups where they were full-time hourly workers and had more predictability of their schedule. So there's that. There's, how do you, in the Uber environment, how do you determine who's an employee, who's an employer, what the wage structure is? How do the laws that we have from the 20th century about wages, health, safety, work weeks, all of those things, how do you have similar or the same or stronger guarantees in a more flexible and fluid environment? And that those are the policy questions that workforce boards need to help us think through.
In business, one of the axioms of change management is if you thought you communicated to the people who worked for you before, as you go through these enormous changes, you got to redouble the efforts at communicating.
Right.
Is that a lesson that workforce boards could take and say, if you've been chatting with policymakers in the past, you really ought to redouble that, because being on the front line, they're on the front line of this enormous change in how we work and where we work.
Yeah. I think workforce boards, you said this earlier, and I think it's absolutely true, need to spend a lot more time with businesses in their communities. Visit the shop floors, shadow the retail operations, really get to know what's on the minds of those business leaders and how they operate. Also, begin to develop a formulation for what a good business is that's creating really good quality jobs, and reinforce those, and think about the match in terms of putting people in good companies that provide good quality jobs. And then in their intermediary role in communicating and taking that knowledge about what's happening on the ground with companies and having a clearer sense of what a good firm is, a good job is, being able to contribute to the policy debates with that really grounded knowledge of what's happening in the firms. And also look at the whole range from startups, get to know the accelerators and incubators and business plan sort of competitors in their local communities, and all the way through publicly traded companies and everything, absolutely everything in the middle. Just spend time out on the ground and know that world, because that's the world that you're trying to influence, and that's where the people that you're most concerned about want to work and will work with the right kind of strategy.
Barbara, it's been a delight for me for us to reconnect, and I really have enjoyed and appreciated the conversation. You've been listening to Workforce Central, the official podcast of the National Association of Workforce Boards from Washington, D.C. My guest has been Barbara Dyer, President and CEO of the Hitachi Foundation and for the National Association of Workforce Boards. I'm Ron Painter. Thank you for joining us.